My reaction is quite mixed. I mean, it really depends on what will happen as a result of these Kurdish movements. If the idea is that they're going to lead a battle and begin sort of a secessionist movement or a separatist movement, obviously that's something that would be disappointing to me, and I think it would signal the beginning of a civil war. I think the Iranian regime will not look kindly upon that kind of action. I think other countries in the region will not take well to a separatist movement. But if the idea is that these Kurdish groups are going to move and open up space for the Iranian people themselves to then rise up and overthrow this regime, then I welcome it. I think the Kurds are a long persecuted minority, but they're politically organized, they're armed, and I would welcome their beginning this battle against Iran's regime.
There were already reports that the CIA was working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of helping in some kind of popular uprising in Iran. What is your sense of the support of a move like this right now? Where exactly would it come from?
Well, as I said, I mean, I think the mood in Iran generally is nationalist, and I think most people will be looking at this, if not with suspicion, then some degree of anxiety. They might worry about kind of what the um, uh, incentives of the Kurds are, what their end game is. Again, if this is a move to free Iran and for the Kurds to be operating within, but while respecting the territorial integrity of Iran, I think most Iranians would welcome it. I think they would welcome any kind of help, just as most Iranians have welcomed American and Israeli help. But if this is intended as something else, as part of an effort to break away from the country, then I think there is going to probably be a lot of anger, and I think people are going to be looking at the Americans that have backed this with some degree of suspicion.
What do you make of the likely reaction out of the regime to these reports about these moves happening as we speak?
Well, the regime for a long time has been trying to paint its opposition as people that are going to either purposely or inadvertently cause the breakdown of the country and give rise to separatism. I think they're certainly going to use this for all its propaganda purposes. They're going to use this to say, "We told you so." That they're trying to turn Iran into Syria. They're trying to balkanize the country. And they may win over some supporters. That's why I think it's really important that the Americans that are backing the Kurds themselves, the Israelis, they have to be very smart about this, and they have to counter signal that their aim is not the break of the country, but simply to weaken Iran's regime so that Iranians can determine their own future fate.
What does this mean, these reports? What does it mean for the protesters, for all the Iranians involved in taking action against the regime? We know about the brutal crackdown in January. We know that the message, help is on its way, was made loud and clear in January. What does this kind of development mean for those people waiting to see, after all this military action, what happens next on the ground?
Well, I think Iranians, like everyone else, they're all waiting to decipher what America's motive in all this is and what their end game is. One day the president of the United States says that he wants to overthrow this regime. Other days he talks about possibly making a deal. I think this may, assuming that, again, this is not seen as a separatist movement, I think this will be seen as a further signal that perhaps America's goal really is to overthrow this regime. And in that case, I think it will be welcomed by the people that have so bravely fought against this regime in the streets.
Which brings me to the next question. The supreme leader, firstly, we're hearing the funeral has been postponed. One wonders why. The next supreme leader, so many questions remain. We know that there are meetings virtually to select a new leader after the elimination of the Ayatollah. But at the start of this joint US-Israel operation, he was eliminated. Now questions are being asked about Mojtaba, his son. What is your sense? What can you tell us? What role could he potentially play down the line?
Well, Mojtaba has always been seen as basically a front runner for this role, but I think he probably imagined himself inheriting this role in a very different way in different circumstances. By all accounts, Mojtaba is incredibly hardline. I think he is probably going to follow his father's policy of not making any sort of concessions to the Americans and wanting to fight on. But I suspect that if this battle continues and if the regime's back is against the wall and its survival is at stake, then he, like everyone else, may be tempted to make a deal with the Americans.
And certainly the concern remains, no less, that the ideology remains the same, father and son, but he is not the only contender. Israel has warned that any new leader would be an unequivocal target for elimination. What is your sense? What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that anyone that takes this role is going to be looking over their shoulder. They know well the fate of the previous supreme leader, and they know that there's been incredible infiltration in the ranks of the Iranian regime. You know, a lot of these folks seem to be working with the Mossad. So I think they're going to have to take extraordinary security measures. They may have to go underground. I think whatever power this new supreme leader has is going to be curtailed because they're not going to be able to do things the usual way. But ultimately, I think it will really depend on how long this bombing campaign goes on for and how successful the Americans are at degrading the Iranian regime's power to fight back and impose a cost on the Americans and on other countries in the region.
Over and above the developments on the ground with the Kurds, over and above the developments in the air with the military strikes, my final question, the name Reza Pahlavi, what does it mean potentially down the line? So many questions, so much speculation, your thoughts and insights.
Well, Reza Pahlavi seems to be the man of the hour, and he seems to have a fair bit of support in the diaspora. I think it's fair to say that he has a fair bit of support in Iran, though that's harder to gauge. What he doesn't really have is much organization. I mean, the Kurds are smaller in number, but they're armed and they're very, very organized. I think Mr. Pahlavi has for a long time thought that he could alone bring down this regime and lead the transition. I frankly am very skeptical of that. I think he's going to have to learn to share power. He's going to have to build a coalition that brings in different constituencies.